Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1178th New Social Environment. I'm Magali, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Dean Spade and Jill H. Casid. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Dean Spade has been working in movements for queer and trans liberation, anti-militarism, and police and prison abolition for the past 25 years. He's the author of Normal Life, Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and the Limits of Law and Mutual Aid Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next, and the director of the documentary Pinkwashing Exposed, Seattle Fights Back. His new book is Love in a Fucked Up World, How to Build Relationships, Hook Up, and Raise Hell Together. And our host today, an artist, theorist, and historian, Joel H. Casid, holds the appointment of Professor of Visual Studies in the Departments of Art History and Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Casid is bringing to completion Doing Things with Being Undone in the Necrocene, the first part of a two-book project on form at the edges of life. Casid is the author of Sowing Empire, Landscape and Colonization, Scenes of Projection, Recasting the Enlightenment Subject, which is in Spanish translation, and the co-edited collection Art History in the Wake of the Global Turn. Casid's artwork has been exhibited nationally and internationally. And with that, I will hand it over to Jill to get us started.
Oh, thank you so much, Magali. I am so excited to see so many friends, loves, fellow travelers in the amazing Zoom room today. And I just want to begin with a personal acknowledgement. I'm the queer descendant of Jewish refugees from Germany and what's now Belarus and Ukraine. My great-grandmother, after whom I was named, was taken on the first transport of Jews out of the Baden region to the Gurs concentration camp in southern France. As the descendant of dispossessed Jews, many of whom didn't survive, I refuse the instrumentalized theft of my grief and losses and the tactical weaponization of Holocaust memory more generally as fuel for the Israeli state's genocidal and voracious war machine. I condemn the US bankrolling of this extermination, the assaults on artistic, academic, and journalistic freedom, and the double standards with regard to boycotts and calls for divestment and sanctions. In the names of my ancestors and my own, I'm with Palestine still, in not just calling for ceasefire, but also naming to dismantle the genocidal apartheid regime of our time, and doing so as a praxis of love. I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Ho-Chunk Nation. I also recognize that I join you via Zoom. I want to thank my friend Chiming Yong for the acknowledgement that Zoom isn't outside settler colonial occupation. The Zoom corporate technology that brings us together virtually is headquartered in San Jose, California, on unceded Muwekma Ohlone land. Let's remember that virtual space too has material basis and participates in the ongoing legacies of land theft. Without material consideration of land back, the right of return, reparations, and abolition of the carceral state and colonial occupation, acknowledgement is, of course, never enough. Let's then not just acknowledge, but also hold open the possible portal that holding this conversation about love in a fucked up world presents as a chance to send the reverberations of a never again for anyone and a transversal no to US imperial funding of the Israeli state war machine, no to the carceral state, no to selective solidarity, no to white supremacy and Euro-exceptionalism, and no to the defunding of structures of care and support. As the channel for a binding bond among the uncounted in the condition of a worldlessness and in my own work, I've been calling the Necrocene to bring close a reckoning with the catastrophe that recurs and has already occurred, and yet within this worldlessness, a palpable sense that there's still ways of doing things with being undone, to insist on the supports for livable life for Palestinian, Black, Brown, Indigenous, migrant, refugee, crip, queer, and trans life. And with that acknowledgement that seems in the spirit of work that's had so much of an influence on me, it's a real honor to be in conversation with the ever brilliant and fabulously concise Dean Spade about Love in a Fucked Up World, this how-to book for getting free together. When cked-Up summons the revolution with that gorgeous image of an army of lovers cannot fail, many of us are still asking ourselves how to love actually. name, by the way, of a particular romance film that has somewhat defined the genre. So, How to Love Actually, but not in that way, not the conventional romance plot way, but how to do and be that army of lovers that can't fail. And here comes Dean Spade's recipe for revolutionary promiscuity: how to treat our friends more like lovers and our lovers more like friends. And I've got the book, but Magley's going to share some fan illustration that we'll have a chance to talk about, as well as that fabulous cover. So, Dean, you don't take this lightly. In fact, you write in your acknowledgments that Love in a Fucked Up World has been a labor of love, 9 years in development. And it comes after your book that I assigned to all of my students, Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next, along with that irresistible video with the fabulous title, Shit's Totally Fucked. What Can We Do? A Mutual Aid Explainer. For those who might imagine movement work and love and romance as somehow separate spheres, would you speak to how you get from mutual aid to love?
Yeah, I was just like, oh, I should put the link to that video in the chat. Maybe you'll do it for me, Magley, if you don't mind. It's on YouTube under the title "Shit's Totally Fucked." I'm so excited to be here, first of all, and so grateful to everyone who organized this, and so grateful to you, Jill. Already, you've made this event so beautiful with the things you've shared. And we didn't talk about this before we got on, but my dad's also my dad's family is German Jews, and my dad's a Holocaust refugee from Germany. And it's just interesting to meet other anti-Zionist German Jews doing very similar work and asking similar questions. Yeah, so for me, like interestingly, like normal life, mutual aid, and love in a fucked up world are kind of like all about the exact same thing, which is, my big question in life is like, how does transformative change happen? What gets in the way? What are the illusions we're under? So normal life is a lot about like what it's like to do social movements and neoliberalism and how we get tricked into like focusing on state reforms and like empty promises of rights, and how in reality we should like be doing deep community work. We shouldn't try to fix the prison. We should abolish it. We shouldn't try to fix the police. We should abolish it. Like that kind of, we shouldn't try to join the military. We should abolish it. And like, what does it mean to see that our movements are sucked into system affirming neoliberal structures, and to instead, make resistance that's like anti-war and anti-racist and anti-capitalist, et cetera. And then mutual aid is like, you know, came from me seeing that the way social movements are narrated is often about, court cases and laws that got signed and men who'd made speeches, and tends to write out the bulk of ordinary people's engagement with movements, which is all through mutual aid. And so I was just like, this misunderstanding is part of a disempowerment story in our society, that all we can do is like vote and post to social media and go to marches and like hope that the elites will do the right thing if we just tell them one more time that like genocide is bad for people and other living things. And like, of course, they already know that. And so mutual aid is, a book that's about being in the weeds around that piece of the work that's hidden from us, but that's actually where we're all really most needed, and also is most people's inroad to, making trouble. And a lot of people told me the second half of the mutual aid book felt like a self-help book to them. Like it's a lot
Mm.
about, group, like what things that come up in groups, burnout, how to create good group culture. It's about this thing, I believe, which is, basic kind of feminist idea that we shouldn't be focused always on outcomes and ignore what's going on in our groups, or we end up, falling apart. And that like how you get there is just as important as, where you got, and that it's a long struggle. So if we don't like take care of how we work together, and we like get 100 meals out this week, but at the end of it, we all hate each other, we're fucked, like, and then, love in a fucked up world comes from exactly that, spending 25 years in these movements and seeing how, I think the biggest danger to our movements is that we don't have the emotional and relational capacity to stick together, and we create these really important life-saving projects and collaborations and groups and then we get emotionally activated and destroy them. And
Mm.
part, I think most of us act our very worst when it comes to the realm of sex and love and romance. That's where we really get super activated, and just like the number of groups that fall apart over people doing unethical sexual behavior with each other, or having breakups and campaigning that person. Everyone has to hate that person. Everyone has to hate that group. The book is not just about sexual and romantic relationships. It's also just in general about like um, emotional awareness when we deal with just like all the conflict that comes up between people. Like it's almost as if we're told to pretend our groups are just like little businesses, even though mostly no one's getting paid, and that we're just getting out the widgets or whatever. Instead of that, we're actually groups of people who are having like relationships, and our movement is only as strong as those relationships. Are we trustworthy? Can we take bold action together? Can we be honest about disagreements so that we actually get to the best possible wisdom to guide our work? So that's kind of for me how the books are actually all the same question, even though maybe there's a way in which they come closer and closer to the most intimate realm over the years. But also, like, I
Mm.
started writing Love in a Fucked Up World maybe around 2015. And I started writing Mutual Aid more like in, 2019. So it's like they
Oh,
also are not
wow.
very overlapping.
Well, can we go over this self-help genre piece of it a little bit more? Love in the Fucked Up World, right, takes up this form and address of a self-help book. I mean, beautifully dedicated to lovers and fighters, but nonetheless, that genre that for many of us, we can only see the self-help genre as addressing change on an individualized level, that it's how do you change, and or how do I change? And would you speak to how, as someone invested in structural change and group change, you've poached and arguably poached to transform what could seem to be a really untouchable genre?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, this comes out of, I have spent my whole life reading self-help books. I, need a lot of help, and have really
Oh,
wanted to
hello, and so do I.
Yeah. I really want to alleviate my own suffering and like be able to show up in my relationships and in groups according to my values, and seeing, the ways that things that have happened to me and like cultural norms get in the way of that. So I've read self-help books forever, and they're terrible in just the ways you're describing. They are really individualizing. They take our problems out of any political context. It's like, how can you talk about sex and love and relationships and like ignore patriarchy and racism that are shaping it? Or how can you talk about like our problems at work and ignore capitalism, or all of it? That's how they are. And so I've had both that frustration and the need for them. And when working with so many of the people in our communities, wanted to hand someone the book and been like, I cannot hand this to them because this book is so ableist or it's so racist. And there's like a really amazing gem on page 43. So I've done a lot of like try verbally translating things out,
Mm.
or just sending a paragraph or whatever. And so really what I wanted to do was take some of the stuff that I do think is helpful, and that is true, but it's a lie when it's out of context, and put it into its context, and move from being like self-help as an individual project, there's something wrong with you and you have to fix yourself, to we're in a collective struggle against like all these brutal systems of domination that implant themselves in our psyches. And if we are going to fight and be together and care for each other, then we together need to notice the patterns, just like we notice the pattern of, you know, apartheid across many settler colonial regimes, or the pattern of Elbit systems being, a problem in all these different countries or whatever. And we notice the pattern, wow, across our community, there's patterns of behavior and norms that cause us to kind of get away from our values of consent, or our values of direct feedback, or whatever. And so that is what I'm hoping this does, is like let us take some of what's true about some of the patterns identified in the self-help literature that I mean, obviously I just cherry picked a few things. It's just one book. And like maybe realize that we're not alone in it. We're not the worst, or the person who's
Mm.
activated right now is not the worst. Instead, we're just all in this like I think a lot of people have this about fat phobia. Like fat phobia is like recognized by many people as like a cultural pattern that's really harmful, that people enforce on each other and on themselves. and that we could surface and work together and be like, what does it mean to have fat positivity and body positivity, in our social circle or in our discussion of fashion or whatever. It's like, I want to do that with more of those kinds of toxic, internalized and externalized psychic patterns.
Well, that segues really beautifully to my also wanting to talk with you about how you're positioning this book for us to use it. And we're cycling through a slideshow that you all will have noticed that has artwork made by readers of Love in a Fucked Up World. And visualizing your concepts in this way and you're sharing them out gives us a version of the kind of movement work of creative exchange that you write about when you, for example, invite us to imagine what liberated relationships would look like and conjure what relationships that do support our well-being, the wellness of people around us, our liberation movements, and the planet could really feel like. How are you hoping we'll use this book? I feel like it's, in a way, more of a workbook than something just to read.
I mean, my real dream is that there was a lot more like kind of exercises in the original draft, and my real dream would be that somebody would like be willing to publish a beautifully illustrated by incredible artists like the ones you're seeing I've collaborated with in the slideshow, that like people can write in it, like they wouldn't give me enough space for as much of that as I wanted. But yeah, my hope is that some people will read this whole book. Great. That's wonderful. A lot of people don't like to read books right now. So I tried to make it skimmable. Like, could you just skim for the exercises or just skim for the charts or bullets? Could you take a screenshot of that and like send it to a friend? Could people sit with a friend and talk through the questions or talk through one of the charts? Like that is very like, done with others, I think is really great. Like, I had one of the most wonderful things that someone said about it. I was in an event in Philly, and someone who had worked for 15 years in a group called Philly Stands Up that works with people when harm has happened in the community. And so they're often like working with people who've done sexual harm and trying to get those people to like understand why it happened and how they can stop doing it again, like do the kind of internal work to figure out like why they did this thing and what it would take to not do it. And the person I was on that panel with, Esteban Kelly, was saying that they've never had like really good stuff to send people. So there's all these really wonderful curricula that exist and like documents that exist about how to start groups like Philly Stands Up and how to create like kind of like community processes that don't use the police to address harm. But Esteban was saying like we don't have like good stuff to send to people who are like we're asking to do this kind of reflective work, that like they always just send them bell hooks, and he felt like it wasn't enough. And he was like, oh, these are the things in this book that I could screenshot and send to somebody. He was thinking a lot of the people they were working with were straight men who would do sexual harm, and but who were otherwise, people who had some shared values who they could pull into this kind of process to talk about repair and changing behavior. And I was like, that's the highest compliment that he felt that they were usable enough. Like that's what I wanted. I think one more thing I'll say about this is like, as mentioned before, about like kind of the community patterns. Like in the book, I talk a little about the romance cycle, the idea that like at the beginning, you like, think someone is like so dreamy and amazing, kind of selectively don't notice unconsciously some of the like things that are harder about them or that would be a rub. And we do this with people, but we also do it with groups. Like you enter a group and you're like, this is where I finally have belonging. These people get me. They have these shared identities. And you feel all this kind of positive projection. And usually at some point with a person or a group, there's some kind of disappointment or mistake. People are human. And then oftentimes there's a cycle of like negative projection that's proportionate to the positive projection you were having before. And so you're like, this person's the worst. I have to tear them down. This group is the worst. I have to tear it apart. I have to stop all the work they're doing and, tell everybody how horrible they are. And that's where like a bulk of damage comes in our movement. So I was like, even if all of us knew about the cycle, we could be really loving towards each other about it. Like, Jill, I know you're so excited for this group you just joined. Oh, you're at the beginning of the cycle. And we can almost anticipate together that later you'll hit a disappointment. And we could decide before you're in that disappointment how we want to act. You know what I mean? Or if you see me spinning out and going after, thinking about going after you, like, yeah, Dean, I know it's really messed up that happened. But we, of course, wouldn't want to like stop the work of that group, or we wouldn't want to like that person's part of our community, we don't actually want everyone to shun them. You know what I mean? Like we could support each other as we go through the cycle again and again, because there's nothing bad about us having those experiences. It's just like, did I then act really far outside of my values and can my friends help me? So in general, I hope all the tools in the book might be like that. Like I don't want people to use this book to weaponize the ideas and label others, but like with people who you actually know, we could be like, hey, sweetheart, don't disappear into your new love, thing. Like stay with your friends a bit. It's safer if we stay in our friendships instead of going to Love Island. Like we could say that to ourselves and each other, and there could be maybe like in my wildest dreams, like a little bit of new common sense that's loving and gentle in our resistance movements, and also like helps us not go off the deep end and hurt each other.
Well, what you're describing is also such a more generous way to be with each other. And I feel like I'd really love to talk with you about this book's generous invitation. I mean, some could say that you preach to the choir, but I think we're a choir that really needs your breath. But you also extend a really generous and kind of seductive message when you, for example, invite us to make our friends in the resistance and write that your greatest hope is that everyone who reads this book will join the resistance and become part of groups working on destroying systems of domination. Can you speak to the kind of recruiting address of this book?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wrote it with a few different audiences in mind, and one is definitely people. I think a lot of us kind of wake up because of our own personal suffering. We're like, ouch. I mean, I remember being in high school and really having like coming to feminism because of the amount of sexual violence in my own peer circle and the beauty norms and all of it, and being like, fuck this. And so a lot of us wake up and do actually reach for self-help books because we're in pain about things that are happening. So that's a whole audience I want. I want people who are like kind of woke on Instagram, but mainly looking at like radical astrologers and other kind of, self-oriented things to find this book and be like, oh, I could go find like hot dates in the movement and like best friends of my life. Fuck yeah, like, because that's true. That's been my experience, that actually the most profound relationships of support for me have come often from people who I wouldn't have naturally chosen as friends, but we have shared values that are the core of our life principles. Like who better to form lasting connections with and to dedicate to caring for. So one part of it is that. And I also think that the book might be read by people who've been in the movement a while and are like, God, that does happen. That's exactly it. And there might be a feeling of care for ourselves, care for others, gentleness, ideas about how to address this. I'm hoping that also we can build towards greater recognition that we do come to our resistance movements and artistic collaborations and groups in general with emotional and social needs, and that's okay. So what if we made
Mm.
our space is really welcoming and really like loving, and we practiced direct feedback and forgiveness? And like what if we, instead of like, this isn't like a business that puts out art projects or puts out banner drops or puts out prison newsletters or meals. This is actually like people in a group trying to live a new way, trying to be a way that we've never been scripted to be, trying to practice emotional skills that are completely taboo and undeveloped. What if we saw the work that way? And a lot of the work in mutual aid and a lot of the stuff I've done since I put out mutual aid, like I just spent, a lot of online workshops and whatever that are about like how to be in groups together and make them work better. And a lot of it is about that. Like, yeah, everybody's got a problem with procrastination because living capitalism is coercive. Everybody's got a problem with ghosting when they didn't everyone gossips. Like, none of us are bad. And how's this working out? And is there anything we can do together that that acknowledges that we are these complex beings and gives us some skills for riding the roller coaster together?
Oh, riding this roller coaster together, one of the tools that I feel like you're really good at crafting are these really vividly concise ways of describing some of the dynamics that get us into trouble. A couple of them, the romance myth and the uh, very vivid relationship escalator. And I'm wondering if you, I mean, okay, we need to read the book, but if you wouldn't mind uh, giving us a preview of some of these key concepts for resisting reproducing dominant culture scripts, specifically, if you could give us a little bit of a look at the romance myth and the relationship escalator. Um,
I love this
and
question.
Magley, maybe we can find the romance myth and the relationship escalator. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this question. Yeah, the romance myth, like I think I got that idea from like second wave feminism, right? Like the idea, I
Mm.
like have this vague memory in my ancient history of like in college finding some, newspaper from the 70s that had this image of two straight people who are like very normatively beautiful, like hand in hand walking through Central Park. And it was like by collage, these feminists had like put pies in their faces and said like smash the romance myth or something, And I remember that made such an impact on me. Like, right. What is all this nonsense garbage that I've just like the beauty myth or any other, set of mythologies? Um, and yeah, the ideas in the romance myth are familiar. They're that the romantic relationship is the most important one, that you should drop everything for it, that if you don't have one, there's something wrong with you. There's a lot of stuff about how like this person should be able to like read your mind. You should always be attracted to each other. You should never be attracted to anyone else. Like this kind of stuff that just sets up patterns like of resentment, of ditching our friends and projects, of expecting somebody else to make us happy, which is not the way wellness and kindness work. That just set up the whole package of people being like miserable in relationships or miserable not in relationships. Kind of the ways that the romance myth is tied into like racial capitalism, like you're supposed to compete for the best possible partners and like, ditch that loser and get yourself a winner. And like there's a kind of market of dating and it's very competitive and like, just all of this stuff that causes people to be mean to their friends and other people in their communities. I think the romance myth is tied to like a thing in capitalism where you're supposed to like have a family that raises you and then like move on through marriage to a new kind of family that's defined by that kind of rigid confinement. And friendship is like this thing that maybe occurs to you in adolescence that like doesn't matter. And that's why I think friendship is like one of the most important um structures for liberation.
Mm.
It's like a kind of less controlled area of our lives where often many of us have more consent and more care for each other and are able to give direct feedback and all of these pieces that are really hard in family and romance and et cetera. So yeah, the romance myth like just sets us up to treat each other pretty poorly. And most of us are carrying it around when we go into a dating, the relationship escalator is part of it. When we go into dating someone or having sex, we are told like, these are the steps you're supposed to go through, and these are normal. You're going to meet, you're going to fall in love, you're going to move in, you're going to get married, you're going to buy property, have children, whatever. It may be slightly different in some subcultures, but like there's some kind of unspoken script. And people expect this of each other and pressure themselves into it, even if they don't want it. They pressure other people into it. Like, you must not really love me if you don't want to move in or whatever. And so there's no consent and people get into stuff they don't want to be in. And so the idea for me is like, and I think there's also a piece of it, even internally, we escalate like I'm feeling insecure in when I meet you and I'm like really attracted to you and I'm like, oh my God, does Jill like me enough? Right. That kind of course, those are cute, normal things that we all feel, or many of us feel with crushes and stuff. But then it's like unconsciously, I'm like, I need to lock this down, whether or not I actually want to live with you or move to the city you live in, or we just like do this escalation to deal with the emotional stir instead of maybe like enjoying that emotional stir and being like, actually, it's really fun to like want someone badly and be excited about whatever. Or being like, oh, I really want to check in. Do I mean to ditch all my friends? Do I mean to, do I actually want to have children? Do I actually want to register this relationship with the state? Any of this. Um, so trying to like move away from this kind of unconscious patterning and this the expectation that there's a normal way and others have the exact same things in their minds as you do in yours. There's so much pain and conflict that comes from that, where I'm like, well, Jill took me to, the Hanukkah party with the fam, so it must be that we are like serious partners. And now Jill's taking someone else to the Passover. What? Like whatever, right? This kind of nonsense where we're just like so not to actually communicating with others about what we expect, what we want, what we don't want, or we're afraid that to even think about what we want, it's just like what you're supposed to want and what things just like naturally mean. I think that's just like an extension of the romance myth and its kind of control.
Wow, that's powerful. And I also love the pie image. That was amazing. Someone needs to draw that for you if we can't find it out there. I found so much of the book very personally resonant, and it was hard, as I mentioned to you, not to review one's whole life and yeah, friendship and relationship history while reading, and you invite that kind of self-reflection. Uh, but I was especially moved by chapter two, stuck on autopilot, swinging between numbness and temporary highs, and its elaboration of how to do more of what your epigraph to that chapter that comes from a print made by Dahlia Sapin-Shevin for the 1999 WTO protests in Seattle that calls up your heart is a muscle the size of your fist. Keep loving, keep fighting. And you take us in this chapter to hard feelings, to grief, especially to feelings we might rather avoid, or what you discuss via Francis Weller as stigmatized feeling. So I've done so much myself around grief and especially melancholy, trying to reclaim it, as a structurally a kind of refusal to move on when we're told to forget grief, not acknowledge the ongoingness of loss, and just, keep to the capitalist myth that you can somehow buy your way to happiness. So I, just really found this chapter really powerful, and was wondering if you'd speak to expanding our heart muscles, or the necessary movement work of increasing our capacity to feel, as you put it, which seems key to how you end with, and I love how you end the book with "Let's be here for what's here together in this gorgeous, fucked up world." And with that, you also seem to be saying, let's be here with each other, for each other, even when what's here can also be devastating, including devastating grief.
Yeah, I love that Francis Weller book. There's a part where he says, we live in a culture of amnesia and anesthesia. And I think about, for me, the experience of living in racial capitalism is kind of this instruction, like go to worker school or whatever, and like kind of keep your head down and do what you're supposed to do and ignore the ways that you're being extracted from or the abuse in the environment, or be the boss and boss people around and ignore their pain and like shut down to that during the day, and then at night go home and um, use like the greatest entertainment technology ever and the most intense weed and the all the things we're living through now to numb out in another way. And it's like be numb on their time, and then be numbing and consuming on your time. And that feels like the recipe for right now, and the kind of overwhelm people are in is especially strong right now. And for me, it's clear that like being numb, I mean, also numbness is required to live in like colonialism, to live in where people are, walking by people who are sleeping outside. Like just like the pain of the world is so, the extinctions, like if you actually felt it and thought about it, it feels overwhelming. And so it makes sense that people are instructed to numb out so that we can function, in their system and do the things that benefit billionaires. And I think being numb, like if you numb to pain, then you're also numb to pleasure and joy. Like it's just part of how it works. Like, or you can only access the kind of pleasures that are, escapist pleasures. You can't feel all of the exquisiteness of being alive. And that for me, like I've spent a lot of my life trying to soften grief, because I shut it down really early because of early losses. And when I am able to access more awareness of grief and to feel sadness and loss and missing people and pain that I shut down, I also can feel more pleasure, connection, belonging, creativity. Like it's so clear. And sometimes I can feel them like back to back. And yeah, it's interesting. I'm here. I'm talking to you all from this a place in the desert that I've gone many years in a row to do silent meditation retreats. And oftentimes, when I am in silence for a long time, I have a more exquisite, detailed experiences of both grief. Like you can hear them practicing dropping bombs at a nearby military base, and when that happens,
Oh, wow.
while you're here in silence with people, you're just like they're practicing dropping bombs. Like people drop bombs on other people. It's happening right now all over the world. It's, you know what I mean? I always see these images of like the military practice in Vieques and Guam and, just all the places in the world, obviously Gaza. And then I also have experiences where I'm like walking, in the sand and like the sand is sparkling and I'm like, oh my God, I'm an animal on a planet and I evolved specifically to live here and see this beauty. Like I was made for this. And I often get this, that terrible song in my head that's like maybe an 80s ballad. I was made for loving you, baby. You were made for loving me. And it's like, I was made to love being on Earth and to have everything I need provided by the planet. And yes, there are many hideous systems that are in the way of that for most of us in many ways, but that's incredible. And both these things are true. And I'll feel them like back to back within 5 minutes very profoundly. And I just try to hold on to that when I leave and go back to screens and go back to endless emails and heartbreak and struggling with administrative systems to support people I love in prison and all the like things that can make me feel other less alive parts of the emotional spectrum, which are also acceptable and fine. But yeah, I think like right now especially people are getting so much bad news and we're getting it by ourselves on a screen and it's like here's an image of genocide and then here's an advertisement and then here's a funny meme and then here's the ice sheets are melting and like there's no emotional processing time for that. You're like there's an impact of not I think we're evolved to hear bad news from other beings, to be with another warm animal who's got facial expressions and is like telling us about what had just happened. We've just lost someone we love, or like the idea of getting news by yourself is super new evolutionarily. And then also like not like we don't have any time, we don't have any solitude. People are listening to a podcast or playing a video game, even when they ride the bus, even when they commute. Like there's no time to like have a memory of yesterday's conversation surface and be like, oh, what was that like? Or something that happened 10 years ago or 30 years ago. Like there's just a loss um, of processing, and as a result, I think there's a loss of emotional range. And then we show up at a meeting or at a conversation with our family member or our lover, and we just are kind of like spasming, like emotions are just kind of like blah, you know what I mean? There's not we're having a hard time holding any space for ourselves or others in the ways that are really just like natural to us, are just being disrupted. You know what I mean? And I hate the word natural, but that ways that were typical of humans for many
Hmm.
thousands of
Hmm.
years. And so yeah, I think it's rough. Like it's like I think there's a lot to do to try to reclaim any space for feeling with others. I mean, a lot of people are doing climate grief groups, are doing Kelly Hayes, a journalist I really admire. I recommend you read everything she ever writes and listen to her podcast. She was talking about like she started a group where like they meet on Sundays on Zoom and they just like actually ask each other how they really are and they share some stuff that's sacred to them. And almost everyone in the group will say, this is the first time of the whole week where anyone who asked me how I was really wanted to hear it. Like we need a lot more space for this stuff. And instead we like show up at our mutual aid group meeting and are like, we got to get through this agenda and there's no space for us. And then we like freak out on each other or are rude or disappear. Like we need to create more intentional ways to collectively be with the grief and the pleasure. We need to celebrate together, all of it. And it's instead there's just like more isolation than there's ever been in our society. And I do think our movements are a place that needs to like take that up explicitly, invite people to things. Like we need to get people into these movements through like dance and, you know, solitude and grieving rituals and like, meaningful. And I mean solitude, like for me, like going on a meditation retreat and being like, I'm in silence in a group of people. We're all cooking together. We're all supporting each other to be here. None of us could do this on our own. We'd all just go back to the screens if we were at home, like we're like creating actual space to collectively be countercultural, as I think a lot of what it is. And that's what I'm hoping. I think it's happening. I think more people are turning towards those kinds of efforts or tools, and there's just like a zillion ways to do it depending on like your subculture.
Well, I feel like there's so much that we can take from this book, including ways of also breaking up that don't break our movements. That was also a part that really spoke to me. Uh, could we talk a little bit about Magley? Could we go to the part on how to support your friend through a breakup? And could you walk us a little bit, Dean, through ways that we can come together in grief, but also one of the ways that grief can also tear us apart is the ways that we break up and sort of pull everyone down with us. So, would you mind, taking us a little bit through how to break up without tearing our movement?
Absolutely. And I also just did and every year I do a Valentine's webinar for the Fireweed Collective for the last 5 years. And this year I did it on breakup. It's really fun to do a breakup webinar on Valentine's Day. Like bring your date, plan your breakup now. But yeah, I think it is really amazing to think about how to ethically break up while we're still in love with people, or while we're still in best friendship or new roommate delight. Like we are going to have conflict in any relationship periods, especially if we're doing anything that matters to us. And the more strongly we feel about the person, the more disruptive the conflict will be, or the more passionate we feel about what we're doing together. And most people have really, really strong feelings about where they live. So roommate breakups are often really, really hard on people, or anything that involves like living together. So yeah, the book has different advice about this, and Sophie Lucido Johnson illustrated some of it. Will you advance us, Magley, and we'll look at the slides together? It's kind of fun. So the first part is like things to avoid for ourselves, like trying to convince other people that they should agree to the breakup, or trying to persuade them not to break up with you. Obviously, like these are things we spend a lot of time doing. A lot of people's relationships get worse as they go through the breakup, and that's often because they're having these fights. This one is about not sabotaging shared projects or social spaces. It's okay to feel vengeful feelings about people when we're breaking up, but like acting on them is different. Like figuring out the difference between like being super mad and upset and having revenge fantasies and actually um, carrying them out is huge. Let's see what the next one is. Um, yeah, a lot of times when people are going through breakups, they make really intense demands on each other, like about their new dates or about spaces, or just like trying to feel control of these feelings. And what is it like to try to be careful around that and like talk to a friend and get some support if that may be the case. And then this is gossiping and campaigning. A lot of this book is about speaking to people directly instead of talking about people behind their backs. So much harm happens. It's one thing to be like, can I have a confidential conversation with you, Jill? I'm really struggling with this group. And then we have a confidential conversation where I vent all my stuff and you don't talk to other people about it. It's different to like try to get you to like tell everybody this group is terrible because my feelings were hurt in the group. Or, also a lot of us put there are real political differences happening, but then we like make it only a political story. So I'm like simultaneously, it was really hard to be the only trans person in the group. And I felt really left out when everybody went out for drinks together. But I just go to my friend Jill and say, Jill, this group is transphobic. Like I don't,
Mm.
right? Because I can't really feel or know the emotional part of it, or take, have awareness about that piece. And so can we kind of be careful if we're weaponizing our politics and campaigning against groups and people? A lot of people what I notice, especially in romantic relationships, is just trying to never take a break from contact. And a lot of us, we have to grieve that part of the relationship is over, that if we create a friendship, it will be different, right? And so not not like taking enough space means we just stay in the same dynamics. Then you get together to hang out with your ex and you still are actually in the exact same conflict, even though you're not dating anymore. I think most of the harm of breakups happens after the breaking up. Because when we're breaking up, when we're still together and trying to make it work, we're like trying to think the best of the other person to some degree and whatever. And then once we decide to break up, people can often really start to be much more harsh or critical or vengeful. So taking some space is actually useful, or like, and like some people like not try not to let the other person take the space, like just trying to stop controlling the other person is really, really hard, or trying to stop controlling our own experience. That's the next one.
Mm.
And then this is about supporting a friend, because of course not everybody dates and not everybody does romance and sex, whatever. So this book is also for people who are like in the realm of it and it's shaking up the whole group, even though it's not your thing, it's happening around you all the time. And one of the things people really struggle with is actually listening. So a lot of us, when we should be listening, we instead start to give advice or try to dismiss somebody because we're like kind of overwhelmed by how upset this person is. So the first thing is just like, oh, I'm overwhelmed by their upset. Can I ground enough to be like, that sounds really hard? Most of people want to hear that sounds really hard. Tell me more about what that's like for you. They don't want to hear you say, well, you just need to, like, if am I trying to shut them up, because I'm
Mm.
uncomfortable being around strong feelings. What's the next one? The other thing, yeah, some of us just like don't even know we're doing it, but we space out when someone else has a strong feeling around us. So just even learning, like, wow, what was it like in my family or in where I grew up when people had strong feelings? Like, what did I get out of that? What would it take for we're all going to need to do a lot of supporting people in crisis for the rest of our lives. Things are very, very, very dire and they're not getting better. And so how do I show up when people are having a hard time? Not judging ourselves, but just being like, oh, maybe I want to ask a friend what that's like when I supported them on that, or how could I improve those skills? Like we all have a lot of work to do because we live in like a feelings phobic society. What's the next one? I think it's about joining. This is the other thing. Some of us grew up in families where if someone was having a bad feeling, they were like, "Oh, I'm really pissed at the neighbor." You're like, "Yeah, fuck the neighbor. They're terrible." Like, we go even further into it and like kind of stir it and join it. And that might have felt like loyalty, but actually that can be ramping it up. So we might want to instead just be like, "That sounds so hard." Yes, tell me more. Like just again with the active listening instead of joining. And the next one is, I think, about campaigning and gossiping. Oh, anyway, somewhere in there. Also with our friends. So, like, when I find out that someone has really harmed my friend Jill, can I not then go around the community being like, that person's terrible for these 16 reasons? Um, but instead just be like, wow, they're another fucked up person just like me who's having a breakup, and try to remember what I admire about them also. They're a mixed bag just like all of us, and telling everyone to cast them out or hate them or give them the cold shoulder or not invite them to things is not going to support our community well-being.
Thank you for taking us through those. I feel like I myself got so much from that section of the book, and I appreciate your taking us through the explainer. Uh, I also have a question about language. I kind of love that you're willing to have as your title, Love in a Fucked Up World, even if it has an asterisk in it. And there's something about the directness, the immediacy of the expletive, and that puncture of the particular not just decorum, but all the things that we're somehow not supposed to say and not supposed to express, including uh, our devastation, our anger, our grief, and it feels like the expletive makes some public space for those feelings that we're not supposed to have and not supposed to express. But I understand that this was not your top title choice for the book. Can you tell us something about language and also about the title?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy with the title now, but I originally what I wanted most was the title was It's Not You, It's Everybody. I liked the
Mm.
idea of like that kind of classic, it's not you, it's me, like breakup line being instead, moving us towards the collective. I also was for a while into the title Get It, comma, Together. It's like it's usually rude when people tell each other to get it together, but actually we were trying to get it, which could be like sex or it could be like revolution together. I was into the title "Keep Loving, Keep Fighting" from that "Your Heart is a Muscle, the Size of Your Fist" poster you talked about. I was also into the title for a while, "Love in a World on Fire." Um, but it was just we went back and forth with the publisher. Like they wanted a title that really showed it was a self-help book, and eventually we came to this, and um, I'm happy with it now. I feel like it works, and it is transparently what it's about. I think it's helpful. And people keep being like, this book just came out at exactly the right time. How did you know? Because it came out right around the, inauguration.
Mm.
I was like, I've been writing this book forever. Like there's no plan here. But I do feel like people, it is a moment where a lot of people are like just trying to figure this out. Oh my God, we need our groups to work better. Our lives are terrifying. And like the kind of combination of like personal and political is a relief. I'll also say about language that I can't remember if I said this already. I really tried to write this more accessibly than anything I've ever written. And already that's something I really, really care about is like getting things out in the world, make a lot of videos, try to like just do things that lots of people can use, make everything free and circulating. But I really, really wanted this book to be readable to as broad an audience as possible. And one of the first reviews said that they thought it was good for teens. And I was like, yes, like I really want people to be able to skim this book who don't read books. We're making a podcast, which I'm doing that like just a 12 episode podcast in part just to like get these ideas out to people who don't like to read. And I wanted it to be like you could take a screenshot, like I just wanted it to be just like not not locked down away from people. And some of the presses I talked to before I published the Algonquin wanted it to be more like essays, more like bell hooks, all about love. I really wanted it to the best of the self-help genre is the kind of like skimmable, like really like open it to a page and kind of get one idea like that. I wanted that kind of feeling in it, like not super wordy. And I think I'm mostly happy with that. I think it's like always like there's always, it'd be cool to see there's like people who are experts in writing in plain language or writing things for a middle school audience. I'd love to see somebody take part of this and like make it even more accessible, like just that would be a dream for me.
Hmm. Well, before we open this up to more questions, I was wondering if we could cycle back to the what you're talking about now in terms of how you're hoping that this is going to be used. Do you have a favorite exercise that you invite us to do? Because I found that really interesting that the chapters have synopses, but there are also uh, exercises that you invite us to engage in.
Yeah. Oh, I'm torn between two. Yeah, I think I'll share the what else is true exercise. A lot of people who read it have mentioned that one to me.
Mm,
It's based on the idea that like when we get really upset about something, like when we have conflict with our lover or like the group is having a fight or whatever, we often get a kind of tunnel vision. It's like all I can think about is like, you know, Jill won't write me back. She said she looked at me mean in the meeting and, or whatever, like, or she said she doesn't want us to have sex anymore or whatever. Like I'm obsessed with this one thing and I'm not sleeping, thinking about this all the time. And I've kind of lost perspective on my life and the world. And so the exercise is like a few different steps. The first step is you just write the thing that you can't get out of your mind, the strong thing you're thinking into this small circle. Like, Jill doesn't like me or whatever. Like, Jill disagreed with me in the meeting. She's the worst, whatever. And then outside that, in the first step, you just write in the larger circle around it, like what else is true about Jill? Jill was kind to me when I was sick. Jill really believes in supporting prisons. Whatever. This group has done this or that. Like whatever else is true, if you can remember anything else that's true about this person besides this recent rift, right? That can kind of give a little perspective. The next one, you again in a small circle, write that thing. I'm so mad at whoever. And then in the bigger circle, you write what you don't know. Like,
mm,
maybe Jill's not feeling well. Maybe Jill didn't call me because you know, she took her meds. Maybe, Jill's, caring for their sick grandmother. You know what I mean? Like whatever, all the things I don't know. I don't really know what it meant, why they didn't invite me or why they disagree with the proposal. You know what I mean? Either why I felt they looked at me funny, whatever. And then the third circle, you do it again, what I think, what I'm believing, this group is so terrible, this person, whatever. And then around that, you write what else is true about your life, right? Like, well, not everyone in the group opposed the proposal. It was actually just two people, but I'm just seeing it as everybody. Or, you know what, like these other six people I know really love me and support me. Also, there's these other projects that are really meaningful to me. Like whatever, anything else that reminds me, like I have a whole world. Like if I'm there obsessing about a date, like I also have other friends, or maybe I have other dates, or like other things exist. I love my dog, whatever. Like what else is in my life? So you're kind of getting some perspective. Then there's a little chart where on the left side of the chart you write things I can control. Like I can go for a walk right now. I can go to bed early. I can call another friend from the group and talk about whether to continue with the proposal. I can follow up on my tasks from the group. Like whatever you can actually control. On the right, you write the things you can't control. I can't control what Jill thinks of me or anybody thinks of me. I can't control. And then you just rip that in half and like burn that other part or throw it away. Like that's none of my business. I can't control that. What can I do? Where am I? How do I get back on my side of the street, as we say in some 12-step programs? That kind of piece. And then the final part of the exercise is you just go through the little set of questions that are kind of about like, is this bringing up some historical stuff for me? Like, is this similar to how I felt when I was in school and I was the only kid experiencing this? Or is this similar to like this role I had in my family? Is my relationship with Jill right now reminding me of my dad? Or, just like, is there anything happening here that can make this really turned up? And can I be loving to that part of myself? Oh, Dean, the ungrieved grief about your dad or about the way other kids treated you at school or your siblings or just maybe I want to eat my favorite meal from that time of my life. Maybe I want to look at pictures from when I was that age and show them to a dear friend who loves me. Like, is there anything I can do to care for that? And part of that also is remembering what's going on now isn't just what's going on now with me and Jill or the group. It's also probably some historical stuff that's making it turned up, and that might help me not throw it all at you because I'm like, oh right, I'm stirred up, and I like for a lot of the book is just about knowing when we're emotionally activated at all, because there's a difference between like the thought going through my mind, Jill's terrible, and I've got to get her kicked out of the group versus I'm stirred up right now and it's making me want to do some stuff. All right, okay. That millimeter of awareness can help me act more according to my values or apologize if I don't. Just like, and it can help me feel like I'm in choice. Like a lot of the book is just about like, do I know I have choices? Or am I just being kind of run by a reaction? And most of us would benefit. I know I would from like as often as possible noticing when a big feeling is happening and then getting to have like a gentle way to approach it instead of just acting it out.
Mm. Well, I really found myself, I'm wanting that workbook version of this book with the space in which to do those circles. Maybe in addition to the podcast, that'll happen, or maybe. As a reader, we just need to make that for ourselves. But I so appreciate how you give us so many ways of, as you put it, doing our values rather than only being activated. Uh, I see that we might be at time for others' questions. Do we have some things queued up, Magley?
First off, thank you both so much. This was so wonderful to listen to. And we do have quite a few questions, so I'll try to get through as many as I can. The first is from an anonymous audience member who asked, do you think it's possible for nonprofits to authentically engage in this kind of organizing work, and or does the nonprofit industrial complex run too deep? I'm feeling drained by the nonprofit 40-hour work week and feeling like the workload doesn't have space for real connection and engagement.
I love this question. Probably the author of this question has already read this book, but I have to plug such a good book about this, which is the book called The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. You can find it online for free. It's an anthology. It's kind of old now, but it honestly is just like the Bible on the question of kind of understanding why nonprofit work is so often really unsatisfying. And in particular, how like the shift that happened from the really revolutionary period of the 60s and 70s, which was, global anti-colonial period, but here in the US, also a period of intense revolutionary activism for Black liberation and decolonization and against the Vietnam War and feminism and queer liberation, et cetera. And that the kind of backlash to that, which included, COINTELPRO and the assassination and incarceration of so many people who were in those movements and the dismantling of them through various government action. And then also the rise of a huge nonprofit sector and this kind of new idea that if you want to make that kind of change, you should do it through these funded kind of career-oriented groups that, because they're controlled by government and philanthropic donations, have a very limited vision of a horizon of liberation. So they do work that's usually depoliticized social services or certain like limited policy and legal reform work. And they're siloed in issues, and it's like kind of like it was a way that like the kind of broader revolutionary movement that was very internationalist and lots of cross-pollination as part of crushing it and moving us to a period where a small set of people try to get those jobs and everybody else just sends donations, and it's a dead end resistance context, and it's been very effective. And I've spent a lot of my life working in nonprofits, and also I've worked in nonprofits that have really tried to actually be mutual aid projects, and it's very hard. There's just like the pressures of the formalization of the workplace, the tension between like, are we a workplace that's trying to like make a good job for these 7 people, or are we a revolutionary community project that's trying to respond to constantly changing conditions. There's kind of a lack of nimbleness inside nonprofits because they're like wedded to like work plans and 501c3 status and the paychecks of the people who work there, whereas like unpaid groups tend to be able to be more responsive to what's happening in the world. And there's some really amazing work that happens out of nonprofits, and a lot of really amazing people work in nonprofits. And so I think I spent a lot of time working with groups, trying to shift organizational cultures, trying to move towards having consensus decision making and having groups be places where people can really make decisions together and like move with the group's wisdom and kind of undo the like very kind of inevitably abusive hierarchies that are created by hierarchical structures. And I sometimes work with nonprofits, usually like abolitionist nonprofits, trying to do that. And it's just hard. I think we can try to bring these sort of emotional skills, honestly, to anywhere we are. Like we could, the university workplace, which is kind of the workplace I have now, the nonprofit workplace, if you work as a nurse, if you work as a teacher in a school, like any place we are, we can try to do stuff with other people. And, the question is, are you trying to make the institution do it? I think we've seen with like the whole history of like, multicultural neoliberalism, like the kind of like the DEI world, like a lot of that stuff gets really watered down and often harmful when it's like when we attempt to institutionalize it. And a lot of times it's more effective when it's bottom up. So I think just like doing this stuff, like having reading groups in our workplaces, doing like doing grief groups, or doing like we're going to have a space for survivors of sexual violence, or all the things, in any workplace any of us are in, all of that is necessary, and like we're all there, all the people who've been through this stuff and are going through this stuff. So I think in general, like bottom up rather than top down methods of doing that tend to be more effective. Sometimes you can still get money out of the boss to do some part of it, like, hey, can we have food while we do this? Or, hey, will you let us do this on our work time? I think it's worth trying. I think that like I've worked with a lot of like anti-violence groups that are like feminist nonprofits run by women of color that are like sometimes more willing to have meaningful ways for us to show up. But like if you're in a space where someone is literally your boss and could fire you, how much emotional authenticity are you going to have? It's hard, what I mean? I think it's like we need to also recognize the conditions. And so we don't create that fake thing where it's like we all work at Walmart and we're a family. And it's like we're not a fucking family. You know what I mean? Like, so I want to, and that nonprofits can be just as, they can also be hierarchies like other workplaces that are harmful. So I think in general, it's worth trying to transform any org that we're in that's supposed to be serving our communities and making trouble, but is maybe doing less of that than it. And there's lots of ways to try to push those things. I think the tools in the back of mutual aid and like the workshops I posted earlier, like those things are designed for mostly unpaid groups, but nonprofits sometimes use them and sometimes can get something out of like changing their organizational culture or changing their idea of leadership. And also, I think all of us who are in the movement need to do unpaid movement work, because that's where the more radical work happens. And we need it for our own well-being. And we need to figure out how to make sure, like, I think a lot of people feel like I couldn't possibly work a full-time job and do unpaid movement work, but that's what people have done for all of history. Like if you think about like the Montgomery bus boycott, like all those Black women who are working all day as domestics and then also coordinating all the mutual aid to move tens of thousands of people around the town for 18 months during this boycott. Like it's like that's just what movement work is. And the question is, what is stealing our time? And I think a lot of our time is being stolen by screens and entertainment technology, and just figuring out like how do we get our time back? How do we get our emotional capacity back? Because the unpaid movement work is always going to be the work that actually moves the movement forward the most, and the place where we can be our full selves, say what we really think, you know what I mean? And like we need that to like be at our own revolutionary edges and be pushed by others in those spaces. So that's my hope, is that people can, even if you have a nonprofit job, can like not have that be the end of where you do the movement work.
Thank you so much for that answer, Dean. The next question is from another anonymous audience member. And they say, Dean, you've steadfastly resisted looking to the state for solutions to the many intense crises they create. Things have gotten so bad so fast in new arenas. In these rough times, what recommendations do you have for our collective resistance?
Yeah, I think our collective resistance is just about mutual aid and direct action. I mean, it's kind of intense. Like now more than ever, everyone can see that there's no looking to the state. You know what I mean? Like it's really like there's no one there who wants to answer our call, even more than ever. I think that was actually always the case. But I think it is a time for us to empower ourselves to stop looking up and begging for people to fix our problems and be like, it's going to come from us. And so, that's what I'm saying everywhere. That's what I'm rating everywhere. It's just, yeah, it's mutually direct action. We don't need, it's not like we don't have the right analysis or the right strategy. It's just like, we just need so many more people doing the day-to-day work of caring for others and trying to disrupt the nonsense, like hiding people from the cops and from ICE and making our own medicines and giving them out, and housing people who are coming out of prisons and jails and who are living outside, and like there's direct support to each other. And then, blocking the coal trains and the pipelines and like breaking people out of prison, like whatever all the things are that people have ever done in movements to disrupt the genocidal death cult that is currently, our captor, and so how do we do that? Luckily, there's just so much evidence, it's already happening in all of our communities. We just have to figure out how to get more and more people plug in, how to make that stuff more welcoming, how to draw more people. And we need like tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, because, the other side has the money and the guns and we have all the people. But most people are disempowered right now.
Thank you. Two more questions. This one is from Perry. Perry says, hi, me and some of my friends are doing a book club for your book. One question that came up last meeting is, what are some recommendations for getting ahead of conflict with friends specifically? Many of us develop those skills for romantic relationships, but not friendships.
Yeah, I think the main thing is talking about things sooner. It's like people just hold it back, and then they wait until they're really mad and they disappear or they blow up, and it gets really hard. So just like, it's just like, how can we practice feedback all the time? Like, Magley, I know you really want to go out to this thing and I want to go to this thing, and let's really talk about it. Or I felt hurt when you didn't invite me to this. Or, just like checking things out, like just being like, just doing that a zillion times more than we do, and believing that it's actually going to bring us closer. People are often like, oh, maybe if I tell my friend, then it'll like be a rift. And actually it's like to tell each other what's really going on, and then to be heard really deepens the relationship and the trust, right? To be like, wow, like Magley listened to me and wasn't defensive, and like I can feel the love in that and the care, and I can trust, like, and then like Magley's like, wow, Dean really cares about our relationship and told me what he was really thinking, like all of that, right? And so figuring out how to practice feedback, and like I do, there's a workshop, and the ones I linked earlier, where I do this basic exercise, but you can do it with your friends, where you just talk to each other, like, what was the time that you gave feedback and it went really well? What was the time when you gave feedback and it went poorly? What was the time you got feedback and it went well? What was the time when you got it and it went poorly? Just like talking about memories. Where did I learn what I currently know about feedback, and what would I like it to be like? And it's not about being perfect. Like, it might be that I tell Magley I really love to get feedback only in the morning because I'm, have fatigue at this hour or whatever. But like, it doesn't mean you have to do that, right? Like I want to be ready even if someone comes at me, not in my favorite way, and to still be open. But it can be lovely with people we are going to do a lot of stuff with. Like if you're going to travel with a friend, there's going to be some rub, or like just like how can we just practice it and also practice the idea like, oh, let's practice apologies. Let's practice forgiveness. Most of us have never had an experience of a really good apology and then really forgiving and letting go. Like that doesn't happen with lovers or friends or in blood families, So like, could we have that? Like, how would that change our faith in other people and ourselves? Just like even having conversations about wanting that, I think, like even in the reading group means people are more likely to try it out with each other and be like, can we try that thing right now? Even if it's like feels a little awkward, I think that, and I do think friendship is often the place where people are the most likely to succeed at that. Sometimes people put all their energy towards their lovers, but friendship, it's easier to feel stuff like I want the best for my friend, whereas with lovers it might become envy or jealousy. Like it's easy, like there's actually, and it's not true all the time. People can be awful to their friends, of course, but like I think there's some room in friendship that we could take advantage of.
Thank you. And the last question comes from Sari Jana. And they ask, how do you balance grief within the reality of a breakup? My relationship ended due to my partner's fear of ICE making them flee to Canada.
I'm so sorry. That is so heartbreaking. Yeah, I mean, I think also just grief just takes as much time as it takes. Like it just takes so much time. It's like, can we just see it as sacred, and just it's like, it's okay I didn't feel like eating. I didn't clean. I did, just not having a shame about however it's showing up. Um, Also noticing, oh, but I did feel some pleasure at this point in the day, or I did enjoy this. Not telling ourselves one narrative of how we feel, because usually we feel a lot of ways during the course of the day. So like grief is really hard and it's here. Other things are here too. Nothing that I am is bad. There's no deadline of how to respond to this. I'm supporting a loved one through a breakup who I think really feels frustrated about still being in grief. And I'm just like, there's so many good reasons to feel grief. If this is one of the places it's coming out, that's beautiful. Like learning how to be good at grief, how to care for grief is probably top skill in the world we're living in and everything that's going to continue to unfold in our lives. I'm so, so sorry. It's like agony to be like, state violence can take everything away from us and our loved ones. And this isn't the first time probably that's happened to you and maybe to your lover. And so it's just like letting ourselves grieve all of that history as well.
Thank you for all the questions, everyone. We're going to close out with a video, and I'll give Jill or Dean a chance to introduce the video.
Well, we wanted to end with a little lightness, a little treat, an animated video that Dean, you keep saying is so old, but it feels maybe for that reason really exciting to bring back. Also, as a reminder of all the various ways that you figure out how to get your ideas across. And yeah, I think some of what we're also talking about is, using all the strategies. And maybe there's some other things that you want to say about this video before we close with a short treat.
Just say, yeah, this is, I think it's 14 or 15 years ago. This thing, there was like some kind of brief technology online where you could put your own words and the cartoon characters would say them in a computer voice. And so people who I knew were making them about everything. And I made this one. I love, Jill, that you pulled this out of the vault. I forget about this all the time. So I'm very excited to see how it stands up with you.
It feels so good to be with you.
Yes. I am really enjoying being in love with you.
Let's never get married.
Yes, let's never.
I don't believe that registering with the state or spending a lot of money on an event would make our relationship better.
I only want us to stay together as long as it is good for us both.
Sometimes I feel worried and scared about our relationship ending.
Sometimes I feel like I want to own you.
Sometimes I think about how my parents might feel better about me being queer and trans if I got married. Plus, I might get some new towels.
I am glad we are queer, and we can talk about these feelings instead of just reacting to them. I want to move past competitive, fearful feelings about sex and love that make me miserable. Do you think we should go to the weddings and commitment ceremonies that some of our friends are having?
I don't know.
I love our friends and want to be at their parties, but I feel a lot of grief about it.
Me too.
Totally.
I want a world where romantic relationships are not privileged over other kinds of friendships, where we don't make empty promises about forever.
Me too.
I love having non-marital sex with you.
Me too. It feels hard for me to be at events that cost thousands of dollars, when I thought our friends were committed to fighting capitalism and redistributing wealth.
Do you think we should go?
I love our friends, but I don't want to go to events that feel painful, silencing, and depressing to me.
It's not that fun.
I hate it when people say that gay marriage will disrupt gender and family roles, because gay people will bring something new to marriage.
Oh yeah. I hate that too.
It feels like what is happening is the wedding industrial complex has got gay and lesbian people in its clutches, and they are all building desires for its boring, expensive fantasy.
It is so awful that people keep saying this is an issue of equality. There is nothing equal about the state privileging certain relationships over others.
If we want equality, we should get rid of marriage and make it so that no one has to have their immigration status, healthcare access, or parenthood depend on being married.
You are so hot.
Let's dry hump before we go to the beach, okay?
Okay.
Thank you both so much. What a perfect way to end
It
this.
feels
Oh, sorry. Had to make sure that I closed out of the video all the way. Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Jill. Give me 1 second. There we go. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the YouTube channel. The RAW has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Roderick Schrock and Charlotte Kent on iBeam. And as is real tradition, you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much again.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you,
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you,
Thank you,
Magley.
thank you.
Thank
Great.
Thank
y'all.
you so much. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you,
Jill.
Magley. Thank you, Min.
Thank you, you guys.
Thanks for the
Thanks,
video.
Thank you, Dean.